The PlayStation 3 is next on the chopping block. Which one of these games will be added to the backlog and which ones will be packed away? Let's find out together. I really think that the PlayStation 3 is overall a very amazing and at the same time underrated console. It was a late bloomer by Sony, but once Sony had realized that they kind of messed things up for everyone, especially themselves and their customers, they really sort of dug deep and started focusing on what was important at the time, the games. And I think if you look back at the first party output, especially, the main developers, I guess, quote unquote, if you will, for the PlayStation 3, they really did an amazing job. We look at the likes of Naughty Dog with the Uncharted franchise coming into the picture, and of course The Last of Us, a great new IP from them at the time. But then you also look at some of the smaller, not smaller at the time, but still not necessarily as well established as some of the other franchises, or developers like Insomniac, for example. I know they weren't a mainstay or a Sony first party owned studio at the time, but they still were primarily putting out games for Sony, and they put out a lot of games in the Ratchet and Clank series, along with a brand new IP, which was Resistance. Two franchises that I at least when it comes to Resistance, I want to play a lot more of. I haven't really played any game in that franchise yet. But Ratchet and Clank as well. I mean, I've played a few games in there, but there's still way more that I would like to play. But yeah, Sony was really bringing it. And while there were many duds, like for example, right here, Rambo, the video game, from what I've heard, not the greatest of game, you can also look back at the library and say, man, they had some amazing titles as well. The thing about the PlayStation 3 that I personally did not enjoy as much was the controller. Overall, I think their controller was much weaker than the Xbox 360's controller. And if, both systems were pumping out most of the third-party games for, each console that kind of were the similar, I think the deciding factor, at least for me, and perhaps for many others, was the controller look and feel. I mean, the Xbox 360 controller was superior in every way, shape, or form. Things, I think, have changed since then. I think while the Xbox controllers have been a great evolution, I think Sony has really stepped up the game, especially if we look at the PlayStation 5 today. The controller is really an amazing feel, and I think is, in my opinion, the best controller out there. But yeah, the PlayStation 3, besides its controller, had some amazing games, really big exclusives, some great franchises that unfortunately Sony has kind of dropped. We look at, of course, the before mentioned Resistance game, gone, no longer applicable. Perhaps some of the, what was that racing franchise? Was it MotorStorm? I hope it was MotorStorm. I can't remember. But the initial one was a launch title for the PlayStation 3. And unfortunately, that series is done. We haven't seen a Sly Cooper game. There was one that was released, I want to say towards the middle, maybe towards the beginning, I don't remember, of the PlayStation 3 life cycle. Of course, they did the remake of the older games on the PlayStation 2 as well. But there was a brand new one. And that series is gone. And you have multiple other series that unfortunately just kind of got lost on the PlayStation 3. So there's a lot of value here for gamers that want to really understand the history of PlayStation, how Sony evolved from the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3. A lot of people consider the PlayStation 2, and of course some also consider the PlayStation 1 to be Sony's best system of all time. The PlayStation 3 really can, in my opinion, hold a candle to any PlayStation console out there. I think one of the weakest aspects of the PlayStation 3 was its selection of RPGs. They were good RPGs for sure, but they weren't as great as some of the ones that you could find on the PlayStation 1, the PlayStation 2, and even, later on. I think the PlayStation 4 is an absolutely amazing console for RPGs that really a lot of people don't talk about, but they probably should, because it is absolutely fantastic. But other than that, I mean, I think the PlayStation 3 also brought us the Move controller. It was a very experimental thing for a lot of people, and I know a lot of people are going to say, well, they were kind of following the Wii, copying what they were doing. And yes, that is absolutely, I think, accurate. They were more than likely doing that. But the question, that I would ask is, did they evolve the controller in any way, shape, or form? Or did they make the gameplay experience different from what the Wii was offering? And the answer is, I really don't know, because I didn't really use the Move that much, but they tried to bring us something different. They tried to bring us creative ways to play, games and experiences that we may not have had otherwise. So I think, overall, when you look at the sales numbers and stuff, it didn't sell as much as the PlayStation 2, of course, but, the console generation with the PlayStation 3 and the Wii was a very, very interesting sort of mix of basically three heavyweights going at it. And it was a very fun battle. And it was definitely a great time for us gamers, because I think since then we have not really seen parity in the gaming world when it comes to, big console manufacturers. Something that has sort of hurt us in the long run, I think. Not to say that there are not great games being made on, different consoles today in this day and age. But I think truly when you look back, I think it's the PlayStation 2 era, the PlayStation 3, and of course the consoles prior to that, where the competition was really, really fierce and everybody was putting out some great exclusives. And I think it was, honestly, in my opinion, some of the brightest moments of gaming history. Nowadays, how many amazing, big AAA games do you see getting put on systems? One game comes out every 4 to 5 years, so it's really not that often. I think this was the last generation where big AAA games were coming out on a much more frequent basis than they ever did in the future. PlayStation 4 and on, we stopped seeing the flow, I guess, if you will, of exclusive games from basically any AAA developer. They all had a great run on the PlayStation 3 up to the PlayStation 3, and from there on out, things started getting a lot worse. Let's just say that. So, anyways, I've gone through basically the initial array of PlayStation 3 games that I want to keep in my cycle to potentially play in 2025. And the ones that came out on top were Bloodstone 007. This was a backlog game from last year that I did not play. Spider-Man Edge of Time. I have beaten most of the Spider-Man games in this particular series, but not Edge of Time. Record of Agarest War 0. I know there are other Agarest War games before this one, but I always like to have a tactical turn-based RPG, and I'm going to add this one. Resistance Fall of Man. I have not played a Resistance game at all. Need to give it a shot. Hopefully it will land on the random generator. And of course, Ratchet & Clank. There are plenty of games on the PlayStation 3 in the Ratchet & Clank series that I did not play. As a matter of fact, I did not beat any of them, if I recall. So at least I wanted to add one. So there we go. Currently we have, 5 PlayStation 3 games added. So we have 9 DS games, 6 or 7 Nintendo Switch games, and 5 PlayStation 3 games. I have to do a drawing soon because I got to get started on playing some games. Thank you for watching. We'll talk again soon.